Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. We're going to get started in 2 minutes, let people trickle in a little bit, but we appreciate you taking the time to join us today. Hello, everybody. I'm Annie Mazes from Hachette Book Group. I am joined today by fellow publishing colleagues and some wonderful authors. And Jessica Schoten from the Syosset Public Library will be moderating this fantastic panel, Books That We All Thought Might Be Perfect Book Club Suggestions. And at the end of the author portion of the program, the publishers will do a bit of a book buzz to suggest some more book club titles. So thank you for taking the time out of your day to join us, and I'm excited for the next hour. Jessica, take it away.
Hey, everybody. I'm excited as well. This is Jessica. I am from Syosset Public Library, and we have four amazing authors here. Let's get started with the Q&A. Our first author is Chelsea Bieker. Chelsea is the author of the debut novel Godshot, which was longlisted for the Center for Fiction's first novel prize and named a Barnes and Noble Pick of the Month. Her story collection, Heartbroke, won the California Book Award and was a New York Times Best California Book of 2022. She is the recipient of the Rona Jaffe Writers Award, as well as residencies at MacDowell and Tin House. Raised in Hawaii and California, she now lives in Portland, Oregon with her husband and two children. Welcome, Chelsea.
Hi, Jessica. Hi, everyone. It's so wonderful to be here. Thank you so much for having me today.
I'm very excited to talk to you. This book that we're going to be talking about, Madwoman, was amazing. Questions. My first question is, Madwoman covers some heavy topics regarding domestic abuse. Within Chloe's story, you make a quick reference to Sleeping with the Enemy, which is a film from 1991. How do you think that the narratives of domestic abuse have changed since then in the media? And how do you think the way these stories were depicted in your youth shaped how you wrote Clove's story?
Yeah. When I started writing Madwoman, I didn't know that I was going to be writing about domestic violence. I thought I was really writing more of kind of a darkly comic book about motherhood and wellness and kind of some of my experiences that I was having with my own two young children at the time. But I realized I really couldn't approach the topic of motherhood without examining the way that motherhood had brought me so much back into my own childhood and so many memories. So I think around that time, I also remembered watching and telling my second grade teacher that my favorite movie was Sleeping with the Enemy, much to her shock and appall, I'm sure. Maybe she was expecting Beethoven or something. but it really was my favorite movie. I had watched it with my mom, and it was really the first time I had seen something similar to our experience, with my father depicted. And the wonderful thing about the story, especially to a young child, was that it had a resolution, right? Julia Roberts' character gets away in the end and she defeats the bad guy. And I just remember having such a response to that. And it really opened up my worldview on what was possible. I was probably like 7 or 8, things are more simple. And so but it was really integral in helping me understand there could be like a different trajectory for us, I hoped. And as I was writing Man Woman and I started kind of unraveling some of my own memories that I had really pushed aside for many reasons, I remembered that story and then realized that it's actually a novel by Nancy Price. I'm sure many of you know that. I didn't know that as a child. I just saw it as the movie. Um, and it's actually an amazing novel. And what was really interesting about it is, this came out, I think, in 1988, around then. Um, and it was, or maybe a little before, but it was really kind of talked about as a novel of pursuit. And I think then around that time, the conversation around domestic violence was changing, but I mean, it was still very early in the conversation, shockingly. And it had only really started to be, criminalized, actually, like, whereas before it was seen as more of a private issue between a husband and a wife. So a lot was happening, but when these stories started entering into the mainstream, they were really talked about more in terms of passion, pursuit, these sort of key words that sort of seemed to stand in for what actually it was about, which was violence and abuse and control and grooming and all of the things that I think now we're talking about really openly, but then not as much. I feel like, there was sort of a handful of novels that came around this time that talked about violence in a really direct way, yet they were, marketed as sort of under that guise of passion and pursuit. So that was interesting for me to see. And I really wanted to write about violence, namely kind of the aftermath of it, right? Because it doesn't exist in a vacuum. The violence that I witnessed as a child has affected me for the rest of my life. So it's really about what happens to the energy of violence and how does it affect everything we do thereforth, and it really shapes the way that I see the world and the way that I parent my own children in good ways and in really difficult ways. So I think that's sort of where I began with the book, and my hope was to add to the conversation that has definitely changed, especially post Me Too. So
Thank you so much. The next question is, Mad Woman employs so many locations such as Hawaii, San Francisco, and finally the Pacific Northwest. How did each of these shape Clove's journey, and was there a reason you chose these unique settings?
yeah, so my first two books are really rooted in California's Central Valley, where I spent the majority of my youth. And for so long, that was really the only place that I felt like I could write about. And as I started writing Mad Woman, I guess I had sort of tapped out that area for myself. I wasn't as interested in writing about the Central Valley for this book. And place to me is so atmospheric. It's so held in the body. We recall place and it immediately brings up memory. It's very sensory. I think and so these three places, I mean, they're just places that I spent a lot of time and that I have a lot of that sort of bodily recall with, really. And then they also happen to be beautiful, interesting places that were really fun to write about. And I think the juxtaposition between the violence that Clove is growing up in Hawaii with the beauty of that place was really interesting to me too. And how much hope was held for a place so beautiful. You know, the family, when they move there, they think there's no way this can continue in this beautiful place. And of course, we know that wherever you go, there you are. And but it really shapes her. And the water, I think her connection to the ocean continues throughout the book, her and her father's. So these were just the places that were closest to me. And Portland, the Pacific Northwest specifically, was a place where I did so much personal healing that it made sense to have Clove doing some of that healing work there as well. So, and then San Francisco was just, you know, that's a huge place from my youth and a place I spent a ton of time with my dad. Um, so I wanted to capture also that coming of age period that I had spent in that city.
Thanks again. So motherhood and parenthood in general is a thread that connects Clove to her past and present. How did the nuances of this theme act as a catalyst for how her story unraveled?
Yeah, motherhood. Part of the book where I really began writing the book was much more centered, I think, on sort of Clove's hormonal experience with when she weans her child from breastfeeding, which when I weaned my daughter when she was 2 years old, I had no idea that there were such things as post-weaning anxiety, post-weaning depression that could be kind of triggered by that transition. And there's almost nothing written about it. It was one of those things that became really a personal investigation on these like moms boards online and trying to find other people that were experiencing that. So it was hard to find anything. And I think even today, like not a ton is written about that. Such is the way of women's healthcare. But you know, I started there because part of that transition had the effect of really bringing me back to my own past and my own childhood in sort of an intrusive way and a shocking way where I was just immersed in what it was like, you know, for me when I was my daughter's age. It's like I felt like my children became these mirrors where I was just kind of forced to look at how my life was when I was the same age as they were. And I think a lot of parents have that experience. You can't help but do that comparison. And so it was sort of this reobsessing as I watched them grow up and sort of reparenting myself through them as well. And so naturally it really shaped the trajectory of how I processed the past and also really importantly, how I saw my own mother, because I think I had a real firm story about her and about her experience and what she should have done and been like and how she should have responded to certain things. And once I became a mother myself, it was really impossible to hold that same story anymore. It became much more complex for me, and I was forced to really see her um, yeah, with a lot more complexity, a lot more compassion, a lot more anger at times, you know, all of it, but a lot more multidimensionally, I would say. And that is in the book. I think Clove is both wanting to convey her story to her mom. She wants her mother to know her and know what she's missed. And then she also wants to understand her mother and the decisions she made for them. So I think all of that desire made its way into the novel for sure.
Thank you so much. It was a wonderful book. Um, so
You.
you're welcome. So my next author is Alison Espach. Hey, welcome, Alison.
Hi, thank you, Jessica. It's-
So first, a little introduction. Alison Espach is the author of the novels The Adults, a New York Times Editor's Choice and a Barnes& Noble Discover Pick, and Notes on Your Sudden Disappearance, which was named the best book of 2022 by the Chicago Tribune and NPR. Her short stories and essays have appeared in McSweeney's, Vogue, Outside, Joyland, and other places. And she is a professor of creative writing at Providence College in Rhode Island. Welcome, Alison.
Thank you. It's really wonderful to be here. I really appreciate this.
I have questions for you, obviously. The Wedding People is tangentially a post-pandemic novel. And by the way, The Wedding People is the book we're going to be talking about today. That was the one thing I forgot to say, sorry. The Wedding People is tangentially a post-pandemic novel. What caused you to choose this time period for your novel, and had you begun to think of this story prior to 2020? How do you think it might have been different if this had not been the background theme?
Yeah, I did actually start this novel long before 2020. I was tinkering with it, or I just was tinkering with the opening when I was writing Notes on Your Sudden Disappearance, my last novel. And I had a lot of what would become the book, right? The kind of kernel or the germ of the idea. And this woman showing up at this hotel where everybody at the hotel is there for this woman, Lila's wedding. And Phoebe, the protagonist, the narrator, is not, right? She's showing up at this hotel and she's the only person not there for the wedding. And I had this idea, I had her walking into the hotel. I was like, I kind of was figuring out why she was there and what could she bring into this space. And then I stopped writing it because I set it at a luxury hotel and I had never stayed at a luxury hotel. So I just like exhausted my imagination. Like I put up some beautiful copper sconces on the wall and I imagined these like regal staircases and then I just felt like a fraud. Like I don't actually know this space. So I stopped and I actually thought it was a novel I was never going to return to for that reason. Then I started to teach Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf, a book that I had always taught as a professor, but I was teaching it for the first time during the pandemic. And it really shed new light on what was going on in that book and maybe some of the things that I had previously missed because, I really focused in my teaching on sort of connecting students to the idea that, oh, this is about a woman throwing a party after a pandemic, right? After World War I, right? Like a party kind of takes on a different meaning after so much sadness and isolation and tragedy and I think that really helped us connect to the book in a new way, at least for me, speaking for myself. And so I really liked that question. And when I started thinking about that, I immediately returned to The Wedding People. And I thought, yes, right? Like, what does it mean to come together after a time of so much loss and isolation and tragedy? And a wedding really did feel kind of different after the pandemic, or at least as we were sort of coming out of the pandemic, coming out of lockdown and gathering so formally for the first time. And so I was just very excited by the possibilities of that kind of story and that kind of backdrop. And I think for Phoebe, the main character, she became really clear to me with this backdrop as well, right? She was someone who was, like many people, lonely during the pandemic. She was isolated. Her husband had left her, and it felt at least okay during lockdown because there was almost like a shared sense of it, a national sense of mourning. And when the world started to turn again, right, when people started coming out of their homes and started going to events and being asked to return to their normal roles, Phoebe isn't ready, right? And I really connected to that feeling of not being ready, right? Like this, the world is starting back up again, but I still want to hibernate. I still want to sort of feel what I'm feeling, right? Which is incongruous with the joy and the celebration that's going on around us. And so that became a really important tension for the novel. And really led me to that first question of like, well, what do you do, right? What do you do if the world is demanding you return and you're not ready? And for Phoebe, the main character, it's to leave it, right? It's to say goodbye. I'm not ready for this.
Thank you so much. So The Wedding People is the perfect balance of heartbreaking and whimsical. What inspired Phoebe's story and the storm that she swept into?
Well, thank you for saying that. I thought my 20s and 30s were a special blend of heartbreaking and whimsical. So that certainly was a lot of inspiration for this book, sort of just the ups and downs, or sort of the contrasting textures of our 20s and 30s. But I will say, during your 20s and 30s, and there's so much that's being celebrated. Weddings, engagements, babies are being born, houses are being purchased, degrees are being earned. There's so many reasons to come together and celebrate, like that's the stuff that makes life worth living, right? But there are also times when, we or I, speaking personally, would show up to these celebrations, and be sad or feel a kind of grief that I didn't know what to do with, right? A kind of grief that, for whatever reason, made it really difficult to be at the event. And I wanted a character like Phoebe to sort of be a person at this wedding, who could help anyone who was feeling with or sort of struggling with those kind of secret feelings, right? I think we show up to weddings like on a mission to prove to everyone that we're the happiest person that ever lived, and we couldn't be happier for the bride and groom, or the marrying couple. And we kind of spend the week or the weekend sort of lying or pretending. And Phoebe becomes sort of a release for those characters. And she herself is someone who's struggling with those issues as well. I used to be that kind of person at weddings. I used to work at weddings during graduate school. It was back during the time when we just started renting photo booths for weddings. I think we see that a lot more now, but at the time it was very confusing to people. They would be like, is that the thing that's supposed to be at the mall? Like, and so my job was to basically stand next to the photo booth and explain it to people and tell them how to use it. But I was always asked to dress for the event, which meant I was always wearing a cocktail dress. And I looked like a wedding guest, but a very sad, lonely, bored one who never moved. And this weirdly attracted a lot of people to me, like anyone who was just not feeling it or, not getting along with their family. And as soon as we started talking and I told them that I wasn't here for the wedding, I was actually just working here, I could see their whole face change, right? Like they could just actually start telling me the truth about their family. Like, I've always hated everyone, or like, my father never respected me, or once a woman was like, the bride doesn't even believe in God. I was like, uh, I don't know. And it was just such an interesting position to be in, to be the recipient of like all the secrets and truths about this event that, there's really no other place to send them, because everyone's, a wedding is so elaborate. It can feel like a stage play that like everyone's committed to playing these roles, and you can't break character. And so I became that person that allowed them to break character. And I really wanted Phoebe to serve that role, right? And I wanted that honesty to become like a cornerstone of the book, right? That Phoebe brings a kind of honesty into the wedding, and then it sort of infects everyone, right? And slowly that snowballs into well, the rest of the novel.
So one of the most refreshing things about this book was the lively and likable cast of wedding guests. Were there any side characters who you became attached to that you hadn't intended would hook you?
Yeah, I mean, one thing working at weddings did teach me is that a wedding is only as good as its side characters, right? They really make the wedding. And depending on who they are, it really dramatically changes the event, the tone, the level of fun. And so I wanted that for the book. I love side characters. And I think the same thing is true of side characters in fiction and people you meet at a wedding. Like, you really only have a sentence sometimes to get them across to the reader. Or like at a wedding, you're meeting so many people and you only have one detail with which to judge them or with which to understand them, right? It's like, oh, this woman is still wearing her airplane neck pillow in the hotel lobby, right? Or like, here's this guy double fisting muscle milk and beer, right? It's like, who is this man, right? You don't have any more information. And so that starts to build questions in your mind, right? Like, is the person standing next to the woman wearing the neck pillow really annoyed that she just won't take it off, right? Or, who is this muscle milk guy who really like enjoys the combination of beer and protein shakes, right? If that's what muscle milk is, I don't know. But I think the goal of the novel really is, with side characters, is to move beyond those initial details, right? And I think the fun of a wedding is also that, right? Or the fun of just meeting anybody new is the fun of moving past your initial impression, your very quick impression of them that you built off only one thing, right? And so Jim was the muscle milk guy, and that was a character who really grew on me. I expected him to be a very minor character in the story, actually, just sort of some side comic relief. But I just couldn't settle with that. I was like, everybody is more than just one thing, right? And so that has to be true of Jim as well. And so as the novel goes on, I kept looking for opportunities to explore a more thoughtful side of him or explore a darker side of him, and look for ways for how he could really be integral to what ends up happening at this wedding with the bride and groom.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alison.
Thank you.
You're welcome. We're going to turn it over to Alina Grabowski. Welcome, Alina.
Hi, Jessica. Thank you for having me.
Very excited to have you. So Alina grew up in coastal Massachusetts and holds degrees from the University of Pennsylvania and Vanderbilt University. Her writing has appeared in Story, the Master's Review, Joyland, and the Adroit Journal, and Day One. She's received scholarships from Aspen Summer Words, the Sewanee Writers Conference, the Squaw Valley Community of Writers, and the Juniper Summer Writing Institute. And she lives in Austin, Texas. Welcome.
Thank you. Thrilled to be here amongst librarians, the best kind of people.
Flattering us. So the book we're going to be talking about is called Women and Children First. So Women and Children First employs 10 various POVs, each one with their place in Lucy's story as well as their own. How did you decide to structure the novel this way? And how did you know whose voices would speak towards the beginning versus the end?
Yeah, as Jessica's alluding to, at like the center of this book is the death of a high school student, Lucy Anderson, and it's set into two sections, pre and post, before and after Lucy's death. And I think in terms of creating the characters and the structure, a lot of it came from what I really love as a reader. I love polyphonic novels. A Visit from the Goon Squad is one of my all-time favorite books, and I'm very voice driven too. That's sort of always my way into character. So it seems like a fun challenge to create this sort of chorus of different voices because every chapter is in first person. Emphasis on challenge when revising. And in terms of sort of like who came when, this book takes place in a small town called Nashquinton, which is this coastal Massachusetts town. And I want to give the reader sort of the impression of being part of the community. And so in the first section of the book, you're sort of more removed from Lucy's death. You are sort of being introduced to what's happened through these little snippets that characters are hearing, but there's sort of less of a direct link to her. And then in the second half of the book, you are sort of getting to know more of her friends and family and people who knew her intimately. And so I wanted the reader to have this experience of sort of getting closer and closer to Lucy, and also hopefully maybe forming some expectations or ideas at the beginning of the book that are then sort of challenged or questioned by learning these new perspectives, because I think a lot of the tension of the book is generated by the contrast between sort of how people remember things or how they recount shared events. And so all these different voices seem like a great opportunity to really get at this idea of sort of like the shakiness of memory, and also how a community forms ideas about narratives that affect everyone within that community and place.
Thank you. So this is a perfect gateway to the next question, which is Lucy's death is the gateway to a whole mess of secrets and tragedies in Neshquitton, Massachusetts. In what ways do you think tragedy is viral, and how did that inform your writing of this novel?
Yeah, I think we're living in such an interesting time with like the true crime obsession and just the ways that people are so drawn to sort of these dramatic events. I think particularly around things that happen to women in terms of like potential violence, or these horrible events that happen. I mean, I've like followed along on Reddit for like threads of like, this woman's missing. There's like something that is so like, in terms of the world viral, it just like infects you absolutely, even if you're not that close to the person. And so I think that is what happens in this book, is that every single person, even if they don't know Lucy personally, are somehow infected by what's happened to her and affected by it. And what I think we kind of don't consider in terms of, being able to scroll along and follow something like that or do our own detective work is these things that have actually happened to people become forms of entertainment. And you don't actually see sort of like how the family is being affected, how the people who are involved are affected. And so I think that's hopefully another thing that the structure of the book encourages, is sort of this more like, not quite salacious, but very like kind of surface level sort of entryway into the tragedy. And then you as a reader are sort of confronted with, oh no, these people's lives have changed. People have been absolutely yeah, their lives have been totally changed by what's happened. It's not just sort of this form of gossip and entertainment. And this isn't, I don't think, spoiling too much, but one of the elements of the book is that Lucy has a seizure, and that's recorded on a cell phone and circulated also throughout the school. So I think the internet has just allowed all of us to be voyeurs for these different tragedies, but also has allowed us to have this sort of eerie distance from them at the same time.
Very well said. So women and children first is a phrase associated with taking care of this population before any other. For instance, when describing a sinking ship, we often hear the captain call for women and children to be evacuated first. Was this the inspiration for the title, and how do you think that this trope translates to the women of Neshquitton?
Yeah, that was absolutely the inspiration for the title. And this was actually a very different version of this was my graduate thesis like years ago, and it was always called that. I tried to change it at one point, and my agent very gently was like, don't change the title. You're coming up with bad new options. But in terms of, the captain's orders, as you're referring to, with a sinking ship, it's sort of an ironic reference in certain ways, because of course implied in that command is, the men are staying back so that the women and children can be saved. So it's this sort of chivalrous gesture in a way, whereas in this book a lot of the harm and difficulties that women experience is because of the actions of men. So it's sort of an ironic nod to that in a certain way. But I think that's also, of course, a command that's associated with safety and evacuation. And a lot of the book is examining sort of the precariousness of occupying a female body and what it means to be safe when you're a woman, and how do you sort of stand up for yourself and defend yourself. And a lot of these women, I think, are in places of their lives also where they're trying to get somewhere else. They're trying to evacuate their current situations in a certain way. And a lot of the book is about ambition and your life sort of not aligning with these ideas that you had for it. So there's sort of a lot of different thematic implications from vulnerability, safety, and also just sort of wanting to escape where you are as well.
Thank you very, very much. I really, really appreciate it. Again, another wonderful book. Now I am going to introduce Anne Hood. Thanks again.
Hi, everybody.
Hi,
Hi,
Anne. How are
Jessica.
you?
Great. I'm so happy to be here. Hi, librarians everywhere.
Welcome. First of all, let me introduce you. Anne Hood is the author of a dozen books of memoir and fiction, including the best-selling novels The Book That Matters Most, The Knitting Circle, and editor of anthologies Knitting Yarns, Knitting Pearls. Her new novel, The Stolen Child, comes out in May. A fun fact about Anne is that she used to be a flight attendant. Her first book, Somewhere Off the Coast of Maine, was written while she was working on international flights and commuting on the train. And you can read about her experiences as a flight attendant in the memoir Fly Girl. And you can see her in the recent PBS American Experience documentary, Fly With Me. She lives in Providence, Rhode Island, and New York. Hello.
Hello, hello.
So we're going to be talking about your book, The Stolen Child. First of all, once again, a wonderful book.
Thank you.
You're welcome. In general, I've seen fewer books with a World War I setting than a World War II. How did this time period inform the starting point of The Stolen Child, and how did it affect the other timelines going forward?
I had to do a lot of math, which was hard. When you open something in World War I, you have to figure out when it's taking place now, right? I have always had this fascination with World War I, and I don't know why. Certainly growing up, my uncles and my neighbors had been in World War II. I did see All Quiet on the Western Front, probably younger than I should have seen it, and it certainly left a mark on me. I very much loved the Pat Barker trilogy about World War I. And I passed this passion on to my son, as parents do. You know, we sort of share with them the things we love. And he loves World War I and is so fascinated with it that for his 30th birthday last year, we actually went to Sarajevo, where Archduke Ferdinand was assassinated, which started World War I. So that's how passionate my family is about this. It's an intriguing war, and I really think it changed the world, how it looks, literally. Countries were created because of it. It had so many inventions that we still feel the benefits and suffer from. So all in all, it's just an all-consuming kind of interesting war. And I really have been wanting to write a novel in which a character has to make a life or death decision. I kind of think of it like a Sophie's Choice novel, one where there's a moral dilemma that's presented to a character. And I had been to Paris and saw this very small painting by a writer named Rose Bonheur, a painter named Rose Bonheur, and it was just of cows. And it really caught my attention. And she happened to be painting in the right after World War I. And so I thought, what if a female painter, because as you know, male painters kind of dominate, especially the Museum d'Orsay where I saw this. And I thought, what if a soldier in World War I is in a trench on a farm, which was very typical. And this painter, this female painter, presents him with a choice, and it haunts him the rest of his life. I have to say that one of the inspirations was my son sent me an Instagram link, or whatever they're called, to a National Geographic photographer who had stumbled upon, while filming, taking photographs of trenches in France, he stumbled upon one that was filled with art that a soldier had made. And he thought, if one soldier did it, I bet others did. And there, it's called trench art now, but in World War I, while the soldiers were waiting for battles, for the enemy to approach, many of them drew or carved on the trench walls. And I was so taken by that. I even wrote to the photographer at the time and asked if I could go and see some of them. First of all, he thought I was, a little off my rocker, I think. But he said they were too fragile. People aren't really allowed in them. He got special permission to photograph them. So this gave me an inspiration. What if my soldier was also an artist and he was drawing on the trench wall, and meets this female artist who lives in the farm where the trench is. So it was kind of a perfect storm for my World War I attraction and fascination.
Thank you. So Jenny, Nick, and Enzo were definitely an interesting trio. How did the writing process bring them together, and were they inspired by anyone in particular?
Well, I think there's always a bit of me in my main female character. And Jenny is a college dropout in 1973. I started college in 1974. This is where the math came in, by the way, because if Nick was 18 when he was in that trench, I couldn't have him be, 107 or something. So it was kind of really worked out perfectly for me that he landed at an age when he was old, but still could travel. And that put him right in the early 70s, which was my kind of sweet spot, because that's when I grew up. So I could really use so much of my experiences and give them to Jenny. Nick had made a decision that haunted him for his entire life, and he just found out that he has a terminal illness, and he decides he wants to go back to France and find out what happened as a result of what he did. He hires Jenny, who has dropped out of college because she was pregnant, and gave the baby away for adoption. And she's working at an IHOP, which is an IHOP near Brown University. I grew up in Rhode Island. I was so excited that another writer here teaches at Providence College. But that was an IHOP I used to go to because it was very cool to go to the street near Brown when you were in junior high and high school and buy things from the store that imported stuff from India and go to the art cinema. So I was able to relive all of that, which was great. So Jenny's working in an IHOP and saving money, planning her escape when she sees this ad from Nick. And that's how that he's looking for someone to accompany him. So that's how their stories intersect. I kind of see it as like a buddy story. I had the TV show Moonlighting in mind sometimes. I know it's so funny, but where she kind of drives him crazy because she's got moxie and she's optimistic and she's can do, and he's kind of a curmudgeon. And of course, their relationship develops over the course of the book. And unbeknownst to both of them, unraveling this mystery sends them not just to France, but also into Italy. And that's where Enzo appears. So throughout the book, we're seeing Enzo. It starts with him starting something that he calls the Museum of Tears. So for decades, he collects people's tears when he sees them crying, collects them in empty paint vials, and he records the date, the person, and why they were crying. And it becomes kind of a cult thing. It's in like one of those Let's Go Italy books. So people actually go to see it. It's in the corner of the shop where he and his brother make nativities. And so when Nick and Jenny get to Naples, of course, they're going to find the Museum of Tears.
Which automatically leads us to, can you tell us a little bit about Enzo and his Museum of Tears. Where did this idea come from, and how do you think it inspired his place in the book?
So, it's so interesting. My novels all come together from me thinking about or being obsessed with two or three different things, usually three. So I had the World War I obsession going. And then I was thinking about what could be the decision. And I had the art obsession. So those two were kind of a natural fit. But I still was struggling to find the story, kind of the thing, as a knitter, I have to say, that would knit them together. And one day I was just feeling sad and I was kind of weepy. And this thought came into my mind: I wonder how many tears I have cried in my life. And I was like, is it gallons? And I just went down this strange path of, what if I had collected them? Would they fill every container in this apartment? What if I collected them and put them in a museum? And I just thought, wow, what an interesting idea. Someone doing that, someone actually doing that. So for most of the writing of this book, it was called the Museum of Tears, because that was the thing that kind of pulled everything together for me. Here is a man, Nick, whose life was ruined by a decision he made. He belongs in the Museum of Tears. Here's Jenny, who is kind of trapped because of getting pregnant and having to give that baby away. She has a story for the Museum of Tears. And then I thought, we all do. Every one of us does. And I loved that Enzo is the curator of all of our tears. He's this romantic, idealistic man. He's almost childlike. He believes in true love. He lives with his mother. He loves his mother. He paints nativities in a shop in Naples. And if anyone's been to Naples, Italy, they know that there is a whole street of nativities of these shops. And that is one of my favorite places to go when I've been to Naples, which is, I've been there several times. I always make a beeline for it, because in those shops, they don't just have the wise men and, the usual suspects, but they'll have like John and Yoko, Joe Namath, the Pope. Everybody can be in your nativity. And so it's just really an interesting, quirky, fun thing. And he, in fact, at one point, he's painting Mussolini. So all these characters are in his hands, and he's just the curator of the Museum of Tears. And it's the perfect person you want to curate your joy and your disappointments and your sadness. So that's how he was born. I thought, and it was actually funny. My editor at one point in the editing process asked me, Anne, do we need permission to use the Museum of Tears? And I said, oh, I made it up. And she said, oh, it seems so real. I wanted to go there. So it's in everybody's heart and mind, I think, the Museum of Tears.
Absolutely. I had the same feeling. I was Googling it. I'm going to ask all of the authors, everybody, to turn their camera on, because I have one question to go to each of you. Thanks again. This was so wonderful. Absolutely fabulous. Thank you. Okay, so what is your writing process? Do you have a specific time of day that you need to write? I know that some authors prefer to sequester themselves with music or find that exercise helps them along. So is there anything you find yourself doing to get into the groove, so to speak? And we can go in the same order we spoke in. So Chelsea, I'm going to let you speak first.
Yeah, I love this question. I think that, for me, my writing practice is very much about all of the things that I'm doing to, I guess, move my body, heal, process my stuff, so that when I get to the page, I'm as clear as possible. That involves, I really like to do any practice that can really put me in that subconscious state. So meditation, visualization, walking. I love making a playlist that feels attached to my story and then walking to that music specifically. And it looks a little different for every book, but generally those are kind of the daily practices that I do. I really like to meditate for 5 minutes. Just, it doesn't take much at all, but 5 minutes before I sit down to write, just to create a barrier between regular life and then the work that I'm going to do on the page. And it doesn't really matter what time of day that happens, but it kind of cues my brain that we're going to enter that other space. And I find those cues and that sort of any way I can sort of get into the brain science of things and kind of hack that, I find it really useful. So it's all about the subconscious for me.
Thank you so much. Alison, you're up.
Yeah, so I used to be able to write at any time of the day, in any position, anywhere. I mean, just truly like couldn't be stopped. But that feels very much like a romantic daydream of my youth. Now I'm very much a morning writer, and I need to just wake up and start writing before I answer an email or look at the dishes in the sink, because as soon as I do something like that or like complete a task, I feel like I've become a person in the world, and that person like needs to do things out in the world. And it becomes very weird to think about then spending the day in my imagination. So there's something about the state that I'm in as soon as I wake up. It's like, it's not the same fatigue I feel at the end of the day, because that fatigue keeps me from writing. But there's some kind of dreaminess, some kind of sleepiness that serves as a really crucial editor for my negative thoughts, right? Or for the person inside my head who's like, what are you doing? This is ridiculous. Like, go to the grocery store, like that. The sleepiness shuts that voice down, and then I can just go. If I do complete a task, because sometimes things have to be taken care of, trash needs to be taken out, I then have to like put on the music. Like, I can't, it's like romancing myself. It's like a weird date with myself. And for each book, it's different. For Notes on Your Sudden Disappearance, I was like listening to Philip Glass like on a loop. And with The Wedding People, Gregory Alan Isaacoff, I just kept listening to his records, and that really brought me to the emotional place where I needed to be sometimes when I couldn't get there myself. So if all else fails, I'll read the opening of some of my favorite books. I find openings really helpful because it's like everything about the book is in there somehow. There's just a lot of energy there that really gets me going. And if none of that works, I just give up and start the next day. And sometimes that's all you can do.
Thank you so much. Alina?
Yeah, I think like Chelsea and Allison, I love listening to music, particularly like instrumental music that can help me get into like the atmosphere of the scene that I want to be writing. I've also recently, I just bought a lockbox for my phone, which seems a little extreme. It's like one of those things that if you don't want to eat cookies or something, you like put it in there and set the timer. But just knowing that that's inaccessible and sort of I'm fully just focusing on like my interior life as opposed to being interrupted by an email or a text is really important. I'm obsessed with scents. There's like a ton of scent description also in my book. So I'll light a candle, which I'm looking at right now, but I really just believe in touching the work every day too. I aim to write 1,000 words every day. That definitely does not happen every day, but I think especially for working on something longer, it does feel really important to at least be in that headspace and that imaginary world and space of creation every day. So I think the longer you're away, the harder it gets to sort of slip back into that place. So I just try and be as consistent as possible too.
Thank you. And last but definitely not least, Anne.
I always love hearing how writers write. It's so interesting to me. So my perfect day is 2 hours of writing, 2 hours of reading, 2 hours of knitting. And then if I have more free time to return to one of those things, but the writing is always first. It's always in the morning. My husband and I play every New York Times puzzle at 9 o'clock every morning. We do spelling bee and Wordle and connections and the mini crossword puzzle. And then he goes off to work and I kind of waste about an hour answering emails, thinking. And then at around 11, still in bed, I always read poetry. And that sort of is the portal into time to write, like leaving the real world behind. Several people have said that they need something to do that. And then I write for 2 hours in bed, reclined with my computer on my lap. And because I feel like that you're kind of in a dream state. And so if I have to get up and go sit at a desk or get up and go somewhere to write or even get dressed, I have trouble writing. And I really admire people who can write with music. I need it to be quiet, pretty quiet. And that brings me to 1 o'clock and lunch and then either knitting or reading and hit repeat.
Thanks again. Well, thanks again to all of our authors for chatting with us. And I'm going to turn it back over to the publishers. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Jessica.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, what an incredible panel. Thank you so much to Jessica, Anne, Alison, Chelsea, and Alina for joining us today. These books are truly perfect for discussion. And so to continue the theme, we're going to spend the rest of the event today hearing from representatives from Macmillan, Norton, Hachette, and Ingram about even more books that we think will be perfect for your book clubs. I am Amanda Camargo with Macmillan Publishers, and I'm going to kick us off. So first up, here is some quick housekeeping. This is all the ways you can find us on the internet. Please follow us or sign up for our newsletter to stay up to date on all the great news and activities from the MacLib team. On the next slide, many of the titles we're talking about today already are or will be available to read on Edelweiss. If you're not already whitelisted for automatic downloads, you can just shoot me an email at this email address on the screen and I will hook you up. Next slide, if you want to hear more regularly about forthcoming titles, my team hosts a weekly book talking series called Happy Half Hour that happens every Monday at 4 p.m. Eastern, where we talk about upcoming adult and YA titles along with some other fun banter. Okay, with that, I will move on to the books. First up is Blood in the Cut by Alejandro Nadarce. This is a gritty, voice-driven debut thriller about a man returning home from prison to try to save his family's butcher shop from vicious poachers. From the Miami streets behind the glitz to the untamable deadly Everglades, one man will revel in the beauty and the danger of the place he calls home as he tries to save his family. Like the main character, the author is the son of Cuban exiles. He is the designated butcher at his family barbecues and loves to camp in the Everglades. Born and raised in Miami, his voice really lends authenticity to every page. And I think this would be perfect for fans of Devil House, Razorblade Tears, and Final Spin. My next title is Moonbound by Robin Sloan. The beloved author of Mr. Penumbra's 24-Hour Bookstore and Sourdough has written a novel with full scope and ambitious imagination, mixing science fiction, fantasy, good old-fashioned literary storytelling, and unrivaled enthusiasm for what's next. It's a coming-of-age adventure story as our main character is called to explore a world full of eye-popping discoveries and challenges, with the best comps being the likes of Hayao Miyazaki and Ursula K. Le Guin. This is fun, brainy escapism at its best, and an old-fashioned adventure across a non-apocalyptic future Earth. Next is Masquerade by Oo Sengoyomi. Tomi Adeyemi meets Madeline Miller in this breathtaking debut. Loosely based on the myth of Persephone, Masquerade takes readers on a journey of epic power struggles and political intrigue that turn an entire region on its head. When a young woman who's been deemed a social pariah is abducted from her home, she discovers her kidnapper is a warrior king who has chosen her to be his wife. In a sudden change of fortune, she soars to the heights of society, but soon she must defy the cruel king she has been forced to wed and risk losing everything. Fans of Ariadne and She Who Became the Sun will definitely love this one. Next is A Hunger to Kill by Kim Mager and Lisa Pulitzer. In this fascinating and profoundly chilling account, Detective Kim Mager reveals how she closed in on and broke one of Ohio's most infamous serial killers. On September 13th, 2016, in the small town of Ashland, Ohio, 911 dispatchers received a call from a terrified woman who claimed to be kidnapped. The man holding her hostage was a serial killer whom the press later dubbed the Lady Killer. A key to his conviction was his extensive recorded confessions, all extracted by one woman. Detective Mager is a real-life Olivia Benson and Clarice Starling, and this is her first-person account of how she used her psychological training to outwit a serial killer and save lives and bring justice to his victims. Next is The Singer Sisters by Sarah Seltzer. This poignant debut follows a 90s alt-rocker as she attempts to follow in her folk legend mother's footsteps from the 60s as she catapults to fame. As she uncovers more about her mother's past, she's deeply shaken by a long-kept family secret. Soon, the knowledge she gains propels her towards a musical betrayal that further fractures their relationship. This is going to be great for fans of Daisy Jones and the Six, obviously, but also Tomorrow, Tomorrow, and Tomorrow, and Lessons in Chemistry. Next is Glass Houses by Madeline Ashby. For this one, I would say think Agatha Christie by way of Black Mirror. A group of employees and their CEO, celebrating the sale of their remarkable emotion mapping AI algorithm, crash into a not quite deserted tropical island. Luckily, those who survive find a fully stocked private palace with all the latest technological updates. The house, however, has more secrets than anyone might have guessed and a much darker reason for having been built and left behind. This one will certainly appeal to fans of And Then There Were None, The Power, and Glass Onion. And then next, my last title for you all today is A Pair of Wings by Carol Hobson. This debut is a riveting, adventurous novel inspired by the life of pioneer aviatrix Bessie Coleman, a Black woman who learned to fly at the dawn of aviation and found freedom in the air. Coleman's story takes us into the drama and excitement of 1920 Chicago, across the Atlantic to train with French and German fighter pilots after World War I, and back to the US for an incredible tour of the nation. In a time and place stacked overwhelmingly against her, Coleman defied all expectations to follow her dreams and take to the sky. The author is a pilot herself and considers Coleman the pioneer who cut the path for her and believes that it is her job to continue her work to make that path wider for those who follow. This is perfect for fans of Hidden Figures, The Personal Librarian, and the Jane Austen Society. And thank you so much. On the next slide, you'll see all of our information once again. And with that, I will pass it over.
Hi, everybody, it's me. My name is Celia Madison. I am the Library Marketing Manager here at Ingram Publisher Services. We are the home of independent publishing, and I have 5 more wonderful titles to share with you today, all popping just around the corner and perfect for all types of book clubs. So my first book is Ocean's Godori. Ocean is a former space pilot who is descended from a long line of Korean female divers. She's never quite fit in with other Koreans, and now that she's been expelled from the Alliance, which is the Korean Space Agency, she's feeling particularly lost. However, when her best friend is accused of the heinous murder of his entire family, she throws herself into clearing his name and discovering the real murderer. For the unfamiliar, Godori is a popular card game that is played amongst families and in illegal gambling rings in South Korea, and it's indicative of the intimate but high stakes of this novel. This is a great novel for fans of Becky Chambers and R.F. Kuang, or anybody who really loved The Mandalorian. It's an ambitious space drama with romance, adventure, and explorations of colonialism and identity. This is also from our friends at Zando, the publisher of Alina's book, and it's from Lena Waite's imprint, which focuses on novels by people of color. If your book club is interested in fun summer romances, I have 2 possible choices for you. This is I Want You More from Zibby. It's a queer, lavish romance set between a grieving ghostwriter named Zara and the celebrity chef Jane. Zara has started a flirtation with a woman in her hometown in California, but she can't turn down the major money offered by Jane, an egomaniac with an extremely lively online following. So Zara flies out to meet her, and the 2 grow close at Jane's gigantic, gorgeous, lavish Hamptons manor. Maybe a little bit too close. They start to pick up each other's habits and start even wearing each other's clothes. But then suddenly Jane lashes out online, and she finds herself on the outskirts of what was her once adoring fan community. This forces Zara to question what her next step should be and how close she's gotten with this woman that she actually doesn't know that well. It's a twisty, tense, and enthralling story about celebrity, lust, obsession set in a comically picturesque beachside town in the Hamptons. If you're looking for a romance that's a little bit softer, this is Pride and Preston Lynn. You really can't beat this one. Lissy Chang is a burnt-out grad student who is making ends meet at the family restaurant when she accidentally serves the Lynn family a dish with shrimp paste, triggering the youngest daughter's shellfish allergy. This will set her on a roller coaster ride with Preston Lynn, who is a Stanford PhD candidate, the local heartthrob, and of course, fittingly, a complete and total jerk. If you couldn't tell by my description, this is a vivacious retelling of Pride and Prejudice. It's set in a gossipy Asian American California community where everybody is involved in each other's business and knows each other's families. Dudley, you might recognize this name. She's a very well-known and popular Regency writer. This is her first kind of contemporary story, and she's able to incorporate the kind of standard Regency tropes with really fresh wit and cleverness. She transformed this tale that has been adapted countless times into something that feels really new and fun and fresh. She's great with book clubs, and this book has already received a slew of really wonderful reviews. In their side review, Kirk has called it a warm, sweet story with all the witticisms Austen fans savor. For book clubs that are interested in literary fiction, Shanghailanders is a really excellent pick. If your book club is reading folks like Tommy Pico, Brian Washington, Jessamine Chan, or C. Pam Jang, this is a really stunning debut novel that you shouldn't miss. Shanghailanders starts in 2040 with Leo Yang. He's a successful real estate investor and just a general man about town. He has this perfect cosmopolitan family, his glamorous wife, and 3 college-age daughters, and they're part of this upper crust jet-setting class in this near future. But the novel moves backwards in time. So we watch the climate heal, we see the sea levels lower, and the family get younger as we kind of trace the complications that brought us to the beginning of the novel. It's a sharply constructed, highly original novel that will offer plenty to talk about. This is my last title. This is for really all true crime fans out there. This is an absolute must read. Sarah Gerard might be better known for her literary novels and essays, but this book is a real testament to her ability as a true crime writer. This is an investigation into the real life murder of her friend and colleague, Carolyn Bush. Carolyn was a 25-year-old poet who was brutally stabbed by her male roommate, Render, a seemingly reserved artist who she went to college with. Gerard goes through the lives of both in the aftermath of Carolyn's murder, attending the infuriating murder trial where the professors at their shared alma mater rally to Render's defense, and Render's parents blame marijuana for this violent murder, and all parties seem to entirely forget about his victim. Gerard explores not just the landscape of a gentrifying hip neighborhood in the Queens, Brooklyn area, but explores the life of these different kind of elite male students who moved from various campuses shielded from consequences for their extremely bad behavior. This is a poem exploration of the deep inequalities of the criminal justice system from a very personal level, and I think it will feel maybe painfully familiar to many readers. I can't recommend it highly enough. All right, that is all for me. Thank you so much for tuning in. I want to just thank our wonderful presenters today. And if you'd like a copy of any of the titles that were mentioned of Alina's book or the ones that I said, please reach out and email me. I would love to be in touch. I'll pass it over to Annie.
Thank you. Everybody, I'm Annie Mazes from Hachette Book Group. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you to our panelists and to Jessica and to my colleagues. And next up, we have, what's my first book? It's called Beep. And it's about this adorable monkey, Beep. He's a very personable squirrel monkey. He finds himself taken from Costa Rica to New York on a grand adventure, and he saves the world. He manages to change the destiny of it. This book is neither preachy nor earnest. It's full of humor and inspiration. It's about climate change. It's for fans of remarkably bright creatures. And I think it's really delightful. I love Bill Roebuck's writing. He's the author of Lucky Turtle and Life Among Giants. He's a kind, charming human, and that really shows in his writing. Next up is Freedom is a Feast. This is a debut novel. It's a Latin American saga of love and revolution in which a young man abandons his families for the cause he believes greatly in and receives a late-in-life chance at redemption. It's 1964. Stanislavo is a zealous young man devoted to his ideals. He turns his back on his privilege to join the leftist movement in the jungles of Venezuela. He trains, he meets Emiliana, a nurse and fellow revolutionary. Their intense connection seems like love at first sight, but their romance is upended. Puyana's novel was born from his own experience. He spent his formative years in Venezuela. He has witnessed firsthand the political upheaval and violence that is in this book. It all ties together in this really family epic novel, high stakes, high drama. Next up, we have The Wildes. Most people know of Oscar Wilde, know that he was jailed and disgraced for being a gay man. Few are aware that before his life was upended by his exposure and relationship with Lord Alfred Douglas, he was an adoring husband to his wife and a very loving father to his 2 sons. Louis Bayard, the author of Pale Blue Eye and Jackie and Me, offers an intimate look at Oscar's wife Constance, their sons Cyril and Vivian, whose lives were completely destroyed by his sentencing. Lewis rewrites history a little bit to imagine what life might have been like in a world that accepted that love is love. Next up, we have Connie by Connie Chung. I grew up knowing who Connie Chung was. I wasn't particularly, okay, fine. She came and spoke with us, and I was so blown away by her charisma, her energy, her humor, and that is completely laced throughout this book. She is going to be at ALA, which I am so excited about because she's a powerhouse in person. And this book is about her life, profoundly influenced by her family's cultural traditions, growing up completely Americanized in the United States, finding that balance. She describes her career as an Asian woman in a white male-centered world. Overt sexism was a real way of life, but Chung is incredibly tenacious. I'm sure that many of you are more familiar with her than I, but this book brings you into her world. She's made history when she achieved her dream of being the first woman to co-anchor the CBS Evening News. She was the first Asian to anchor any news program in the United States. When she was talking to us, she said that she had received so many calls and messages from women who had been named, Asian women who had been named Connie in her honor, because she has been such a hugely wonderful role model and person in this community. She's just a really amazing woman, and I'm so glad that I have read her book now. She's so funny. She's got unwavering support from her husband, Maury Povich, and she jokes about it all the time. So highly recommend this. Lots to talk about there. And finally, The Magnificent Ruins is a book from Algonquin that I absolutely love. Lila returns to India from the United States after inheriting an ancestral home, and she has to confront this culture that she's always been a part of, but sort of on the outskirts from. She's estranged from her mother, who they've had a very tumultuous relationship, and her entire family lives in this ancestral home. Her mother, her grandmother, aunts, uncles, cousins, and they resent her sudden inheritance of this. It's very compelling. Lila is a conflicted heroine. She navigates her family's deep mistrust while confronting a legacy of violence in the family that can no longer be ignored. Born in Calcutta and now living in the United States, Nayantara Roy captures this complex difference between the two cultures and what a contemporary young woman owes to her mother, very much inspired by her own experiences. Very much an addictive read. I love it. And I think I think that it's going to be a perfect book club book. Sorry, I was laughing because I saw Celia's comment. Yes, Maury Povich, Connie Chung, power couple. That's it for me. Please get in touch if you have any questions. Thank you so much.
Hi, everybody. I am Golda Rademacher from Norton, and here is my contact info. Next slide, please. So first, I wanted to remind you that the Library Reads votes for May titles are due by April 1st. That includes The Stolen Child by Anne Hood, which we just heard about. We're so glad that Anne could join us today. I think this book will appeal to so many fiction fans. When I was reading it, I felt like I was right there traveling through France and Italy with Jenny and Nick. And I'm not the only one that liked it. The book did get a starred review from Kirkus. You should also check out This Strange Eventful History by Claire Massoud, which is a family saga loosely based on her grandparents' experiences. And memoir fans should check out And Then What Else by Daniel Handler, aka Lemony Snicket. Next slide. And then here are just a few of our titles coming out in June. Fire Exit by Morgan Talty is coming from Tin House Books. It has already gotten tons of great feedback from booksellers. I would love to see some more reviews come in from library staff, hint, hint. I also want to point out that Annalee Newitz will be on a panel at LJ Day of Dialogue on May 9th to talk about her new nonfiction book, Stories Are Weapons. Sorry, that should have been to talk about their new nonfiction book, Stories Are Weapons. So I hope you're signed up for that. And The Paris Vendetta is a debut thriller coming from Mysterious Press. Next slide. Caledonian Road by Andrew O'Hagan is for those folks who want a big, sweeping novel to sink their teeth into, but one that doesn't feel like it's 600 pages long. O'Hagan has written a contemporary social novel in the Victorian style, drawing a whole cast of characters into company with each other and revealing the way we live now. It's full of characters to love and hate, and television rights have already been sold. And this publishes in June. Next slide. So Howard Norman was a finalist for the National Book Award for his previous books, The Northern Lights and The Bird Artist. His new book, Come to the Window, is loosely based on the true story of a woman who killed her new husband just hours after their wedding and hid the revolver in the blowhole of a beached whale. Crime reporter Toby Havenshaw is dispatched by the Halifax Evening Mail to cover the hearing, and his story subsequently follows the surprising twists and turns of Elizabeth Frame's flight from the law. You also get the story of the reporter Toby and his wife Amelia, some outsized personalities in the small town, and some more surprising twists along the way. And this will be published in July. Next slide. So I feel like all I need to say for this one is here's the new Richard Powers novel, but maybe you want more than that. Coming in September, Playground has a sweeping panoramic scope reminiscent of the Overstory. The book interweaves beautiful writing, rich characterization, profound themes of technology and the environment, and a deep exploration of our shared humanity. Powers juggles multiple storylines, gives us detailed characters that you will grow to love, and beautiful writing about nature. This awe-filled book explores that last wild place we have yet to colonize, the ocean. We will reveal the cover soon, and we should have ARCs in about a month or two. And next slide. So that is it for me. I want to say thank you once again to Jessica and to our amazing authors for joining us today. Thank you to Annie, Amanda, and Celia for collaborating on the webinar. We're all going to be at PLA in a couple of weeks, so maybe we'll see you there. And thank you again, and we hope you have a great rest of the week.